Welcome to 7:30. This Saturday, Australians will vote on whether to change the Constitution to recognise the First Peoples of Australia through a voice to Parliament. The journey to constitutional recognition began with bipartisan support in 2007. It continued during Labor and Liberal governments, with the idea of a voice to Parliament emerging from Indigenous peoples in 2017. Late last year, as the Prime Minister pushed the referendum forward, constitutional recognition as a political project lost its bipartisan embrace, becoming a fiercely argued debate, which now meets its test. As we said at the beginning, recognition has been a long and involved debate in Australia. While Indigenous leaders argued passionately that they were presenting an argument to the Australian people, the debate was shaped in the political realm, and much is at stake for our politicians. Let's bring in our chief political correspondent, Laura Tingle. Laura, welcome. Let's start with your reflections on the campaign.
Well, I think we've got another 48 hours to go. The Yes camp are saying that they're holding out hope. They know that the figures aren't looking good, but they're saying that they've detected a bit more positive support for themselves in the last few days, and they're suggesting that the No camp has disappeared out of sight for that reason now. We shall have to wait and see what happens on Saturday, but it's not been an attractive campaign.
Of all the arguments, if you had to boil it down, what do you think has been the most cut-through argument?
This idea that it's going to divide the country by race, that that it's going to be inserting some sort of new racial divide in the Constitution, and in the process of focusing on things like this, the arguments about why we're trying to do this in the first place, what the reflections are on our history, have all been lost. Nobody's really thinking about why we are trying to recognise people or why we might have to recognise people.
Is there a chasm between what we have seen and how the arguments have been made in Canberra in the political arena and what's been happening with smaller scale individual arguments out and about away from politics?
I don't think that's necessarily been the chasm. I think the chasm has been more that, and I think this has got very disturbing signals for the way politics could be conducted in the future. There's been, shall we say, the mainstream arguments, then there's been a completely different campaign in social media, which I think has often overwhelmed things, and I think that's something that we don't really know how to come to terms with either. I don't think politicians know how to come to terms with that, and I don't think the media does either, the so-called mainstream media. And so it's ended up with a lot of rabbits running down holes, being hotly pursued by all sorts of people, the whole thing getting out of control and very little coherence in the argument.
And what about individuals, for you, who have been the standout performers during the campaign up to now, up to today?
Well, I think one of the factors here is on both the yes and no sides, we've got a lot of sort of disruption and disunity. There are different camps in the yes case, different camps in the no case. Without a doubt, the power of the black on black warfare, if you like, the fact that Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price and Lydia Thorpe have been out there arguing the no case has been a really good reason for a lot of white people to say, well, they don't even agree, so why should we? I think so that makes particularly Senator Price a really lethal political weapon during this campaign. I think the interesting thing on the yes side is it's been people who haven't really been at the centre in a way of that Uluru statement as such, like Rachel Perkins, who've really come through as really articulate advocates for this case.
Now, clearly this started, I don't mean constitutional recognition, I mean this referendum began as a very powerful political moment for Anthony Albanese. What's at stake politically now as we go towards Saturday?
Well, I suppose what's at stake is that it really will take paint. It has taken paint off the Prime Minister and off Labor. It's consumed a lot of their political capital. But I think the real political issue now is what on earth we do. I don't think we decide that till we see what the result is, but it's not tenable that we do nothing, not necessarily just on recognition, but on addressing Indigenous disadvantage. as somebody has said this week, we're living in the no case now. So if the result is no, we already know what it looks like. But I don't think it's necessarily going to do any good for Peter Dutton if the no case wins in the long term. But it does, I think the political implications is that it will fire up the Conservatives to think that this is the way you run politics. And I think that's a really deeply disturbing sign for the country. It's a further push into this idea that you just attack, you just tear down, and that you have nothing positive to say about virtually anything.
Laura Tingle, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thanks, Sarah.
The yes side in this referendum want the voice to be a permanent form of direct engagement with the government for Indigenous people. A no vote would be a profound setback to those Indigenous leaders who put their faith in a process they believed would bring the country closer to reconciliation of past injustice. In the event of victory for the no side, there'll be much to say about how their campaign was so forcefully led by two Indigenous leaders. Whichever way the vote goes, our politicians will be tasked with uniting Australia after the campaign. Good night.